In this segment, we're going to talk about how we can take our basic foreground, middle ground, and background, and how we can add some details to it to make it more of a Georgia O'Keefe inspired artwork. So here are a few examples. One thing that Georgia O'Keefe liked to do is she liked to take very ordinary objects, often that she would find in the desert, or her favorite kinds of flowers, and she would enlarge them and make them up front and center. We can keep our watercolor kind of like this one here, where it's very simple, but it still uses the atmospheric perspective. But we want to remember to try to use overlapping, size, and placement to help us put together our images. So the reason I picked a flower is because I would be able to do all of it in one. Now, some resources I used, and you might even want to use for this, would be maybe a how to draw book or even a how to draw video. So I used this particular page for my pansy to help me figure out just how I kind of wanted to draw those. Then I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to color it, so I did a Google search. So you might even Google search up some images. The art room may have some materials or objects that you can have sitting at your desk and draw them based on what you're seeing right there in front of you. So you might want to check with your teacher to see if she has something that you can observe as you draw to add a nice large object to help you show some overlapping size and placement in your artwork. So we'll be ready to get into this with our materials. I'm going to show you a few different things today. Doesn't mean you have to use those. Some of the same techniques can be used with your regular watercolors as with the watercolor pencils I will show you. But it'll give you a little bit of something different and possibly a little bit more control over your details. Let's go. Okay, for this portion, I used watercolored pencils, but you could do this with your regular watercolors, simply painting over top of your landscape. But I want to give you a couple little notes here on some things about watercolor pencils. There's two ways that I'm going to show you today that you can use them. And if you're using a really dark color, or if your background is too dark, you may have troubles covering that. So especially if you need white and that kind of a thing, that's an area that you want to draw in first. For instance, if I wanted this flower to have a lot of white, because some pansies do have white, I could draw in the flower first, then paint my background spaces around it, and then come back later to add my details in here. So you can draw things first before you do your background. Another thing is that you notice how I have an open space in between here, and that is letting spaces dry so that you prevent any bleeding, and it helps give you a little bit of a crisper edge. And then the size and placement, the size of this pansy is huge. Real pansies are like this big, so it's definitely oversized, especially for this being in a landscape. Normally they would be small flowers, but this one's obviously really close because I placed it down at the bottom, and I'm showing overlapping in the petals of the pansy. So that's why this one object can show me everything that I need to. I could also, if I wanted to, go back in and add some other details back here if I wanted to, but I'll make that decision a little closer to when I get done. So the first way to use watercolor pencils is to begin like I have right here. You can see that I have colored with my colored pencils in here just like I would with normal colored pencils. I've even layered some black over this brown right here, and I can just color right over top of them. And that's one of the ways that I can gain a little bit more control over details and things like that. So I've layered, I've blended, and I've filled in the space with the colors where I want them to be. And then it's easy. I'm going to take a small brush because this is a smaller area. A medium brush might work okay, but I don't know that I necessarily want a big brush. And I'm going to get some clean water on that brush, and I'm gonna scrub-a-dub-dub, being careful to stay inside my lines here. But I'm gonna work up that watercolor pencil to kind of blend it in that area. And it just looks like I watercolored it. Now I'm going to wait, speaking of letting things dry, I'm going to wait to paint that part until that is dry. So while this is drying and before I'm ready to paint this next part, I'm going to show you the other technique that I have for you, which is using your watercolor pencils like portable paint. I used it here and I colored this one in like I colored this one in. So you can kind of see the difference in between the two. This would be a little bit more like using your traditional watercolors in the palette. So to do my watercolor pencils as portable paint, I'm going to use water on my brush, and I'm going to get the paint on my brush by scrubbing that colored tip. Oh, I gotta be careful. You see how I splattered a little bit there? Now, since both of these areas are dry, I can go in with my purple that's on my brush from the watercolor pencil and carefully paint that in, and it's not going to bleed at all. It's going to stay right in that area where I wanted it to stay. And then when I'm ready to add my pink or my red violet here, I'm going to clean my brush just like I would if I were using regular watercolors, and I'm going to do this off to the side here so I don't splatter any more of this onto my paper. And then I can go in, and you'll be able to see where this is wet, how you can get the colors to bleed together. That's actually what I want here with this purple and this pink. I want them to kind of go together. So I want the wet next to the wet. And you can see how they just kind of blend together. Now, if I wanted to add a little bit more saturation, because if you have some stuff in the background that you don't want to see, you want to saturate that paint. That means you want more pigment. So I'm going to get some more purple here. And I can come right along my edge. And I can let that work in, and you notice how it becomes more vibrant. Don't feel like you have to go too vibrant. Watercolors are supposed to be kind of thin. And then I can let those dry and just continue to blend and bleed together, and they will dry beautifully. So then there's the other strategy. Back to this one. This feels like it's dry. So I can now take my brush, get some water on it, and come around that area and start working my way out. Going from yellow to purple, I'm definitely going to want to clean my brush and get most of the water out of it. It's okay if they bleed together a little bit, but I can even give a little bit of space there where it's dry in between to help. Now down here, I'm running into the issue of my foreground is still showing up. So since my foreground is still showing up, I might need to saturate my paint more. I can even scrub a little bit in here as I work this paint up to help kind of hide that even more. I had a little too much water on my brush there. I did not swipe well. Okay. Now you can still kind of see it, and that's where I can do a little bit of both. So I added color. I can't go in and color back over top of this, so I'm going to use that portable paint option. This is getting awfully wet. Onto my brush. And I can try to cover that a little bit more and just disguise it because I want the flower to be front and center. And there you go. I'm ready to finish my last one. I hope you have some fun with this. These are great for details and they do give you a little bit more control. But again, if you just want to use the regular watercolors, there is nothing wrong with that.